Men and women are not the same. That's the title of my monologue, and it relates several things, including the hot topic of the day, sexual misconduct by men. Now, I'm doing this video because I'm a dedicated truth teller, and unfortunately, our culture, the American culture, has three false narratives that are really harming us, and nobody wants to talk about it and set it straight. So I have the unfortunate situation where I find myself compelled to be a truth teller and take my lumps for saying things that nobody wants to say. First of all, the culture is telling us that men and women are the same. Obviously, they're not. And you can see it all over, where the implication is that what makes a man happy will make a woman happy, and that women can do whatever men can do. They can do it just as well. They're basically the same. And it gets worse because the culture has a background from the women's liberation movement that a man's control system is abusing women, and therefore men and women are at odds. The truth is that men's happiness and women's happiness are interrelated, that men and women are the same in the sense that they both are human beings and that their individual rights need to be respected, but they are different in many important ways, and to ignore those differences is only harmful to whoever ignores them. So I'm going to try to relate this also to the topic of sexual misconduct, which is in the news these days, and maybe it'll help evaluate everything more clearly. In the meantime, it's amusing to watch all these guys come out and bow and say that men are pigs and that they're no good and this and that. And anyway, we'll talk about that later. The obvious differences that everybody can see are the genitals and the physical shape of the body, and the fact that women get pregnant and they have babies and men don't. And what most people don't do is figure out the implications of these differences. And in order to do that, you have to understand the field of evolutionary biology, which means the application of Darwin's evolutionary theory of survival of the fittest, or natural selection is a better way to say it, through generation after generation for millions of years, how that affects the final version of the species of today and their biology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but keep that in mind, and that's what you need to understand in order to understand the basic propensities of your own physical nature. If you want to understand your physical side, we deal a lot in my videos with the mental side, but if you want to understand the physical side, you should understand evolutionary biology, and that'll help you understand your own nature. It'll help you understand other people's nature from the opposite sex, and you will be able to have a more effective and productive relationship with them. So one of the things that nobody can see unless they do a blood test is a very important difference between men and women, which is that it's an answer to an interesting question that men are getting quite often these days, which is, why can't men be decent like women? Well, obviously, the ladies that ask this question don't know anything about the composition of their blood, specifically the hormone testosterone. Now, men have about more than 10 times as much testosterone in their blood on average. And by the way, all the things I'm saying about men and women here are, of course, generalizations. There's always some very small exceptions. A lot of these generalizations that I'm making are like in the 99% category. And so they're pretty relevant and pretty helpful when understanding your nature. So testosterone, having 10 times as much testosterone has a lot of consequences. It's some of the obvious ones are that it makes men stronger and bigger than women in general. But a very important overlooked one is that it creates a lot more sexual urgency. And that has a lot to do with a man's behavior as compared to a woman. A woman can postpone sex very easily with not too much adverse consequence. And if you understood evolutionary biology, you'd understand why they developed like that. And you would also understand why men developed with so much testosterone and what goes along with it, which is the sexual urgency. If you want to get a visual read on sexual urgency and the effect of testosterone in a male, I suggest you watch one of these nature videos where you see an elephant in musk. Now, an elephant in musk is a very impressive scene to watch. If you haven't seen one, it's very simple. The elephant has become extremely belligerent and aggressive and could care less about his own welfare, hitting cars, trees with his trunks, destroying huts, anything in his way. And this has a lot of positive consequences, of course, because it's the product of evolution. It's telling the other males, look, don't get in my way. I will do anything. And it's telling the females, don't resist me because I'm a force to be reckoned with. And it works very well for both those purposes, even though it seems totally irrational and doesn't make any sense. So now the reason why these elephants are in musk is because they have extremely high levels of testosterone at a certain time of the year. Now, men have a standard testosterone. It might vary up and down somewhat, but it's quite higher than the ladies. And so if you want to answer the next lady that asks you, why can't men be decent and be like women, the answer is very simple. They have 10 times as much testosterone going through their blood. And that's the reason. Now, unfortunately, men are not going to tell the women this fact, because that's why we got to where we are, and that's why I have to be a truth teller, because men, in order to get laid, because of their sexual urgency, are willing to sacrifice their integrity, won't tell women the truth. And I'm doing this interview for these men so they can show it to their wives or their girlfriends without having to take the brunt of the criticism. Anyway, you're welcome for the favor. So this fact of sexual urgency has a lot of implications. Implied also is that men can be manipulated, that men will pay for sex, that they can be manipulated easy by sex because they're basically starving for sex. Whereas the women, They don't have so much urgency. They can hold off and play, hard to get, and they should, for their own nature, to achieve their own ends, which I guess I could mention, which is they need to be selective in the partners that they choose. Now, maybe I haven't covered all of the issues and the differences and the implications of testosterone levels in men as compared to women. Let me see if I have anything more here that I thought I wanted to mention. Well, here's a few easy recommendations for women. Don't go to a frat party and pass out drunk on the couch or a bed, because as these men with high levels of testosterone pass by, some of them may not be able to resist the temptation and have sex with you. And this was known in cultures forever, and they even had an extreme perspective of having ladies chaperoned all the time and protected. Well, they're taking into consideration the fact that men have these high levels of testosterone. Now, I'm not advocating that, but I'm advocating ladies to be careful and not expose yourself. And if you do, assume part of the blame, because that's absolutely imprudent on your part. It doesn't change the condemnation of having sex with a lady that is passed out, but it's not prudent. Here's another example that always grabs my attention. You see, I mentioned before that men have lost their integrity and are quite willing to lose their integrity. And by the way, those American men that are not cognizant of the fact that they are viewed as pussy whipped, if you like, by the rest of the world, and a lot of men that have not caved and have not lost their integrity, and, well, they don't do what the American men do, which is they say, my wife is always right. That doesn't help anyone by lying like that. It's obviously not true. And you have to have the integrity to tell the truth. Now, I can feel for these men, and if they're not going to get laid, if they tell the truth, I don't blame them for not telling the truth, but I'm doing it for them. Anyway, that was something I wanted to mention. Now, back to evolutionary biology. Here are two very important consequences. The effective male strategy is naturally promiscuity, because a man can have sex with many women. The more women, the more likely that he will have children that survive him and have his same genes and pass them on to the next generation. And he can have really thousands of children if coordinated carefully, like the mothers of the Chinese emperors or the mothers of the Inca emperors did. Anyway, they had a real system to increase the gene pool of their descendants in the thousands. But anyway, or Will Chamberlain, who had sex with 20,000 ladies. Anyway, this is a consequence of evolutionary biology. So men tend to be promiscuous. That is their natural tendency. Now, not all men are like that, but most have that tendency. Now, it's a tendency that you could curb or not, and that wanes as you get much older, I guess, because your levels of testosterone start to go down. So women, on the other hand, that being promiscuous and having sex with a lot of different men will not increase the amount of babies that they can have that will survive. What's important for a woman is to be selective. And having sex is a big deal because it has important consequences for the rest of their life. And they have to carry to term a baby and then raise him 20 years or whatever. The men can get the lady pregnant and be gone. And some of these babies that they have with these ladies won't survive, but plenty will. And so they will be successful in that strategy, evolutionarily examined and evaluated. So that's why I told you before, understand evolutionary biology. It'll help you understand a lot of things in life, not only this. So, a woman has to be selective in what way? Well, she's got to be sure that the guy has good character, that he will stick around, that he will take care of the children, that he will make a commitment, that he's a good provider. And of course, we all know these things. And so the perspective of men and women are different, and the ladies want to get married, and the men try to resist it normally. But you wouldn't know it from the culture. In the culture, the movies and everything is just backwards. The ladies are promiscuous. The men are getting their hearts broken. The ladies could care less. I mean, it's nonsense. And of course, I don't really understand this. Why do women believe this supposed pandering? And look, the best thing for everyone is the truth. And that's what I'm trying to say by being a truth teller here. And opening up a discussion. You may not agree. You can tell me quite frankly if you agree or not. Anyway, selectivity and the importance of the sexual act is what drives a woman's nature. And they have a very difficult choice because there's a lot of liars out there and a lot of men that can fake it this way or that way. And so the women have a hard job. It's not an easy job to select a good partner. But that's what they need to do. And that's why they have stress, and that's why they're ambiguous, and that's why they contradict themselves. They say yes, and then they say no. And the decision is quite simple. Yes, why not? It's great. Sex is fun. It's great satisfaction. And by the way, I need some. So it's two different situations. Men and women are different, like I said in the beginning. So what else do we want to... Oh, here's an interesting point that I thought I might raise. You know, a lot of the women these days are complaining all the time about getting hit on, or the men make passes at them and they resent it and they're angry about it. Well, I'd like to suggest that this old phrase applies: be careful what you ask for, because if all the men stopped making passes and coming on to women and attempting to have sex with them, the women would suffer tremendously, because women need to have attention by men, by their nature. When they get male attention, they feel like they're in the game, and they are, which means it's possible that they could have a relationship and have children, and evolutionarily, that's what they are geared to do, and that's what they are geared to enjoy and want. And it's like a flower that's wilted with no water when they don't get any attention. So, but women, unfortunately, want the impossible. What they would like is for the guys, only the guys that they like, that they want, that they consider good candidates, to hit on them. But that's impossible, because neither the men nor the men are not omniscient, and they don't know necessarily whether the woman is interested or not. And so in order to get what they want, which is to get a good candidate, to have a family and have children, which is what they're geared to do, and when they don't, they become, I won't say the word, but you know what it is, very bitter. And unfortunately, as a result of women's liberationism and women postponing childbearing, We have a lot of bitter women out there, and those are the ladies that are going to come after me if they see this video. Anyway, they are merciless. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out because it's really not something that most people consider. Their job is to separate the wheat from the chaff, and there's no way of getting around it. And wishful thinking that if they could just have the guys that they want to hit on them, make passes at them or whatever, everything would be fine. Or if they themselves did it, made the selection, that's not going to work very well either, because naturally they're not pushed to the same degree that men are because they have less sexual urgency. Anyway, what else do we want to cover? Oh, sexual misconduct. Oh, well, this video is getting pretty long, but a few points. Sexual misconduct is including a lot of things, from forcible rape with a knife or a gun to your head, or a knife to your throat, which is forcible rape, which is quite different from a lot of other rapes like date rape and this other thing, and that is something that has to be punished severely. But sexual misconduct can go all the way to what Judge Roy Moore is being accused of dating a woman that's 17 when he's 32. In other words, dating younger women. Now, there's really nothing wrong with that. And the age of the man, I've heard a lot of these men with daughters say, oh, I wouldn't let my daughter date a man with so much disparity. That's ridiculous. The young man who's also 17 is going to have tremendous sexual urgency and may have sex and be responsible just as likely or more likely than the older guy. What the father should be focusing on is the character of the prospective groom. That's what he needs to be focused on. And if the guy is older, so what? And cultures have for centuries, older men have been marrying younger women, and it's worked out fine. And by the way, most of the women were being married by the age of 17. Why? Well, for obvious reasons. That's when they can get the best price, because they're right at their prime. They're like a flower. They just bloomed, and it's often downhill from there. So that's why they used to try to get married at that age, and that explains the traditions in most cultures and around the world. So I guess part of what I'm saying is, well, let's talk a little bit about statutory rape. The rationale for statutory rape is a reasonable rationale. It is that women that are younger than a certain age, and it has to be fixed, and there isn't any special age that's going to be absolutely right, but it is clear that women up to a certain age don't know the consequences of sex, don't know that they can get pregnant, don't understand the whole process. We're talking, of course, about women that are sexually mature. Pedophilia is a whole different thing. So we're talking about women that already are capable of having children, and the legislator is making a judgment. By now, you should know the nature of sex, the fact that if you have sex, you can get pregnant, and therefore you can give consent. That is the key difference between that forcible rape and statutory rape. In a statutory rape, the legislator is saying you're too young to give consent because you don't know the nature of sex. You don't know the consequences. It's not about age disparity. It's not about, we think that it's not wise for you to have a relationship with this guy. That has nothing to do with it. That's the sexual misconduct thing that they're bringing up with Judge Roy Moore. It's not about that. It's about having sufficient maturity to understand the basic consequences of having sex and what it entails and what can be the consequences. And so a young woman would say, yes, I want to have sex with you, or they don't say that, but they show it. And if you have sex with them and you don't know what the age is and they're younger than the statutory age, you have committed, in most jurisdictions, a rape. And therefore, my advice to young men is find out what the age is and what the law is and stay on the right side of the law, whatever the situation. Now, when I went to law school, I did a paper, a law review article on rape. And it was very interesting because at that time, that was a long time ago, of course, the ages of statutory rape went from 14 to 21. Now, that's a lot of difference. And guess which jurisdiction was 21 years old? Well, it was Kentucky. Now, I want to ask you, do you think that these Kentucky hillbillies are waiting until the ladies are 21 to have sex with them? I don't think so. It's only an unsuspected guy from Tennessee who doesn't know the law and has sex with a 20-year-old, a prostitute even, and then he can be extorted for having sex and having committed rape, which is ridiculous. Now, most of the states have ages of 16 or 18 or whatever the age is. And in my view, I think the standard for centuries age of 14, which is they know what they're doing by then, they know what the consequences is, doesn't mean that they're going to have good judgment in the partner they select. That's a whole different issue. And that's not what statutory rape is about. Now, if you don't want your daughter to have sex, talk to her and help her make good decisions and have a good relationship with her so that she consults you with the prospective partners and doesn't say yes to some jerk. Anyway, that is something that that's my advice to the men, and that's my advice to the women. So I guess the bottom line is, if you shouldn't apply the same standard to men as women, and you should take into consideration